future is. I've had just over 3 years to think through the events of March 31st, 2019. I think today was the first day it finally all came to focus for me. As far as I know, I might be the only one to be able to put some narration to the digital and paper reports. I might be the only one with a definitive record that perhaps someday to someone or something will mean something again. It was a pretty average Thursday, and I was looking forward to getting drunk, as I usually did on Thursdays, because it was 4 days too many in the week. As a midtown detective, 4 days was enough. Down to the precinct, as a lead sorter of human garbage, I got dragged into many report filings and investigations, most of which, honestly, I was just there to quickly adjudicate as either low priority or BS. But there was an unusual report filing that morning. Dr. Martin H. Fermi of Meriwether's largest employer, ChemCon, came to the precinct to report numerous crimes he had witnessed as a lead researcher. Now, ChemCon was something of a lightning rod for conspiracy nutballs across the country and across the political spectrum, partly due to their massive influence in the pharmacological and agricultural industries. The company itself also had well-documented financial ties to arms manufacturers and had a private security firm that operated in Latin America and the Middle East. This security firm was often accused of acting as ChemCon's private army, taking territory, seizing resources by force without regard for the governments hosting them or the local citizens. Again, all conspiracy theories, but as I took a seat in the office with Officer Redford and Dr. Fermi, Dr. Fermi produced document after document of evidence supporting virtually every crackpot theory and rumor out there. Even theories about human cloning efforts at developing proprietary crops that could eliminate gene pools of so-called free crops. And he even produced a smuggled out video of ChemCon employees testing out laser ray gun weapons. Halfway through his presentation of the material to myself and Officer Redford started exchanging rolled eyes and half chuckles to me. There was no way any of that evidence that Dr. Fermi presented was real. It also dawned on me that there was no way we could go knock down their door, and even if we got a warrant, even if it was real. Because by then, if any of it were true, all that evidence would probably disappear. And I knew if it were true, and they wanted a fight, maybe it was a fight we couldn't win. Maybe it was a fight we didn't want to win. Despite his above and beyond claims, what kept me from openly chuckling at him was that Dr. Fermi otherwise appeared to be an average, down-to-earth, middle-aged male, claimed to have a wife and a daughter. He came in wearing slacks and a button-down shirt with a ChemCon pocket protector up front with its characteristic white chevron designs and letters that read, "The future is now," on it. He wore thick glasses and, to all my estimates, a very nice designer old-style winding watch, which I noted that he kept fidgeting with at the time. If what he was saying was true, Dr. Fermi was definitely giving up a six-figure-a-year job. If what he was saying was false, he was still giving up a six-figure-a-year job because I had half a mind to arrest him for making a false police report and driving me up the wall on a Thursday morning. Either way, even then, I remember that I listened to him intently because he seemed so compelling. I nearly fell out of my seat at the end of his report when he told me in clear, plain English that he was an accomplice to murder and in the creation and distribution of narcotics, as well as the creation of a dangerous environmental hazard. He told me that he was the lead researcher on developing a chemical that, if accidentally released, would amount to a global Chernobyl, a species-ending Bhopal disaster, something he said could not be allowed to remain in the hands of an amoral and corrupt company like ChemCon. He was initially evasive about what the chemical could do, but he did mention that it existed in industrial-sized quantities at ChemCon HQ, which was of course located within town, and that it must be destroyed as soon as possible. He went on to say that everything about the chemical's chemistry and its origin must be suppressed to spare humanity an existential threat. He then detailed the crimes leading up to its production and the reason why the project was shut down. Apparently, it was shut down because they had no luck in curtailing the effects of its original undisclosed purpose, and that the supply for creating the drug involved a nasty dealing with a genocide of an indigenous people in South America, and the payoff of that country's El Presidente with heroin, which he said he had a hand in ensuring its purity. He initially came off very calmly and collected, but as he rounded out the last part of his report, he sounded like he was on the verge of hysteria. I think he was credible. I thought he was credible at the time. Nevertheless, Officer Redford asked to be excused from the room and for me to join him. So we took it outside, and Redford broke down laughing outside. And after some time, we discussed that we were not going to press any charges, but we were going to remove Dr. Fermi from the premises and recommend that he seek a mental health professional. As we attempted to placate him and smooth talk him out of the station, Dr. Fermi stopped and he told us that he was saddened that his second plan had to be initiated, and that if we did not clear a direct route from his home to the headquarters of ChemCon immediately, innocent people would be injured or worse. Naturally, we arrested him on the spot for making specific terroristic threats against his employer and the city, and we processed him in at the station. Officer Redford tried to talk me out of getting a SWAT team and a bomb squad over to his home, but since Fermi freely gave us his address, and his threats were specific, and I did find him to be credible at that point, I decided that it was important to send a team over to his home, as his home was potentially littered with additional evidence, including that which he had already provided to us. And frankly, I was curious about what, if anything, could make a man give up such a promising career. I figured that he had snapped, and although he probably would not be prosecuted to the fullest extent due to his insanity at the time, I remember that it was only about 20 minutes later, after I had 2 cups of water and run to the bathroom and a smoke break, that I was called into tactical operations, where apparently the SWAT team had found a timer counting down on an interior wall of Fermi's home that faced his garage. They promptly evacuated the home with just under a minute to spare. The SWAT officers then proceeded to clear a 4-block radius around the home. They also reported that they found no one else inside the home at the time, and that the walls were covered with diagrams and religiously infused writings. Gathered outside, broadcasting live video to our attack ops room, the SWAT team and the bomb squad, and we witnessed a large, round, polished vehicle burst forth from the garage. It was wider than the door and nearly as wide as the walls of the garage, and it tore down the entire garage and even part of the house with it. Slow at first, this vehicle again looking like a polished white flat bean with a swirling white turtle shell appearance, propelled by recessed shiny black tank treads. Turned slightly to the left and then accelerated to about 10 miles per hour and proceeded to ram down the home next door, penetrating the side and driving through it before emerging dusty and dirty but otherwise completely unharmed on the other side. Everything from the wood to the steel to the concrete and brick, any material that the shell would touch would vibrate, then crumble and blow apart like burnt leaves at the point of contact, leaving whatever else just to be bulldozed down and crushed by the treads. After that, it was all downhill from here. Although moving at roughly the top speed of a farm tractor, the machine plowed through home after home, structure after structure, over vehicle after vehicle, without slowing or stopping. From tactical operations, we watched diving into, climbing out of foundations, steamrolling over concrete dividers, chopping down streetlights like they were twigs. We were forced to deploy multiple units ahead of it to try to evacuate buildings and clear vehicles along its path. ChemCon had been informed, and they had an executive team on the way to the station. The SWAT team regrouped from Fermi's home and mounted defense with their submachine guns. Then they broke out a specialized armor-piercing 50 caliber rifle, which was capable of shooting through engine blocks, and then proceeded to make improvised shape charges aimed at the hull and then at the treads. Each of their attacks left the machine completely undamaged and unfazed. After the failed attacks, myself and the tactical operations room personnel shared a premature victory when we watched the machine crawl up the ramp of a parking garage and then fall 3 stories to the ground. But to our bewilderment, it then righted itself and continued unfazed on a direct route to the ChemCon campus. It was just after this that we got a call from Chief Boss. Yes, his name was Boss. Boss said to grab Fermi out of holding and bring him down to the rampage site and order him to shut it down. Now, in my line of work, there were 2 kinds of shots. Long shots and dumb shots. But this was the dumbest, longest shot I've ever had the privilege of taking part in. Fermi made no attempts to resist us as we shoved him in the back of a squad car. Redford drove the squad while I managed the radio. I checked back behind the grate to check on Fermi. I was looking for any sign of weakness, any sign of regret or remorse for his actions, for his creation he unleashed upon Merryweather. He merely clung onto the seat with a certain look of quiet certainty on his face as we whipped through traffic with lights blazing and sirens blaring, racing to the perimeter. The radio and the rumors sang and flew. We heard that a special ChemCon company executive was clashing with Boss and trying to get their own security forces to intervene. We overheard that Homeland Security was inbound for Fermi, allegedly, and SWAT had become progressively bolder with their stash of breaching explosives, only to watch helplessly as their best bullets and biggest bombs bounced harmlessly off the vehicle's shell. As we approached the scene, Dr. Fermi started to talk again. He became quite vocal and quite incriminating, if you could call it that, since I don't think he cared about it anymore anyway. He started talking about the scope of the environmental disaster. He started saying things like Chernobyl times a million, Bhopal times a million. Extinction, certain extinction, he said. He said he was trying to stop it. He told me the name of the chemical and what it did. It was called Rebutex, and that it would reboot the human brain, like flipping a switch. All memories, all learned morality and language, poof, gone. He said it was developed first as a way to try to ease trauma, a potential cure for PTSD. But later it was determined to have certain properties useful for security purposes, i.e., wiping the minds of potential spies or reprogramming seemingly ordinary individuals to become assassins. The goal was then to be able to electrochemically reprogram the person. But the reprogramming element, he said, never worked the way it was intended, partly because of the chemical nature of Reboot-X. And specifically the chemical nature of its incredible potency, as tiny, tiny amounts would have the desired effect of a disruption catalyst in the human brain, short-circuiting certain neural pathways and neurotransmitters without chemically reacting and depleting. It was also highly resistant to the filtering by the body's liver and kidneys, and also by any conventionally deployed public water treatment methods. He said it was like the plastic beads in shampoo turning up in the water, contaminating the ocean, or like BPH and related chemicals which persisted for long term in the groundwater. Once they were there, they didn't come out, he said. They just keep spreading and bleaching deeper and deeper and wider. He said that even at very low doses, it could suppress sentience as we knew it. In very low doses, it would reduce a human being to a dumb ape, effectively permanently, since the substance would persist beyond a typical normal human lifespan. Then he started talking about the machine that he built, how he stole proprietary tech from ChemCon and its subsidiaries, how he spent 6 months building it in his garage, and how he kept it hidden from friends, neighbors, and his family. He spoke at length about how it carried a plasma explosive that would be used to penetrate the HQ building, burrow through the thick armored walls and floors to incinerate the Reboot-X, hidden in large underground tanks so that none of it could escape. He turned to me and said that he had given the proper authorities a chance. He said he gave me a chance, and that everything that was happening now was on our heads and hands, in my head, and in my hands. We drove parallel to the carnage, with the sight of home after home being bulldozed by his machine just outside his passenger window. Fortunately, it was a weekday and few people were home. Ahead were 2 squads, head-counting children from a broken-down school bus apparently out on a field trip. There was no way to move the bus, so in short order it would become the White Turtle's next crush victim. They realized that they were missing a kid, and I overheard the description of the child from the loudmouths assembled there. They said he was a weird boy with red hair and big glasses. The field trip chaperone said that he was autistic. The bus driver, visibly frustrated, trying to pass the blame, all but confirmed the situation and the description. The machine started to climb out of yet another basement from a home it had just wrecked, through drywall and brick and over a rose bed towards the bus. I saw the boy, indeed with red hair and big glasses, pop up on the seat, staring at his classmates. They started to yell at him to get out of the bus, but he seemed content to stare. Of course, the rank and file were also content to stay put. I looked back at Dr. Fermi. I saw concern in his face, so I felt while I still had time, I came to him. I came to him begging and groveling in no uncertain terms. I made my best audition that day as a hostage negotiator, as I begged him, pled with him to stop the machine. He looked at me, then the kid on the bus. He opened his mouth, and then he just shut it. He hung his head and reclined in the seat, and resumed fiddling with his watch. I knew his answer, so I slammed the door and yelled, "Damn it!" louder than I ever have in my entire life. And then I took off sprinting towards the bus, which the device was already starting to crush. I climbed up the rear wheel well of the bus and hoisted myself up to the roof. I stomped on one of the emergency roof hatches until it broke open. It took some work, but I was able to fall through the opening into the bus. I slipped as the machine seemed to slice away the bus like a razor slicing off thin bits of a Twinkie. I grabbed the kid under my arms and hoisted him out of the seat with mere inches to spare before contact with that polished white surface. I barely managed to kick open the emergency door and hop out before the bus tilted back and was slowed against the power of the machine. The child was hysterical and uncooperative, so I had to drag him to the perimeter and then dropped him off with the rest of his field trip group. Those gathered started to applause, but I didn't have time for it. The machine kept crawling on, this time eating a swimming pool. I was sweaty as hell and out of breath, but I tried to hide it. I overheard on the radio that a mobile command center was opening a few blocks away, and just then 3 MARAP-style armored vehicles pulled up. One was from Homeland Security, another was from SWAT, and the third was painted white with red highlights. I could see that the third MARAP was from ChemCon. It was then that Homeland Security began to clear the scene of civilian onlookers as the ChemCon team donned white helmets and dark goggles, the same kind of goggles I saw when I used to watch old nuclear test footage. They removed a heavy tripod from the back of the MARAP and mounted it in the middle of the street facing the machine. Then the team hauled out an enormous donut-shaped object and pointed the hole towards the white turtle tank. The ChemCon troopers ran cable nearly 6 inches thick between their MARAP and the donut cannon. The interior of their MARAP glowed a bluish purple and the air became thick with the smell of ozone. The MARAP's engine turned generator heaved and billowed black smoke. It was then that a Homeland Security officer grabbed me and pulled me down behind his MARAP as the donut-shaped weapon discharged. I missed whatever was fired, but after a loud whine and a pop like a static discharge, a miniature sun flared behind the truck and then disappeared. A small cloud of black and white soot and ash enveloped us as my eyesight recovered from the blinding flare. I peered around the side of the MARAP and found no trace of the ChemCon truck, their futuristic weapon, or its crew. Where all 3 had been just a moment ago, there was only a black scorch mark ringed with fire on the pavement. As the smoke and ash drifted away, the white turtle tank, now blackened on one side, swirled with brilliant intensity, eventually whipping the black back into its shiny white color. The advanced weapon had managed to delay the tank only for a moment, as it regained speed and resumed its course to the ChemCon campus. After that, Dr. Fermi started yelling hysterically out of the cracked window of the squad car. He was gloating about the resilience of his homemade tank, claiming it would stand up to anything short of a bunker-busting bomb. It was then that my mind had this eureka moment. There was precedent for this sort of thing after all. About a decade ago in Colorado, a similarly deranged man constructed a homemade tank from concrete and a bulldozer chassis, then proceeded to plow down half of his town in a sophisticated revenge scheme. At the time, the local authorities contacted the Air National Guard and they were prepared to bomb it if they couldn't stop it by other means. I told Dr. Fermi to shut it, and then I picked up my radio to call in a Hail Mary to the boss. I was told that DHS had already alerted the Air National Guard and they were trying to arm F-16s with bunker busters as we spoke. But it would be a close call between now, when the vehicle reached the campus, and bombs away. Before I could catch my breath or sort my head around dropping bombs in Merriweather, I was called over by Homeland Security forces to identify and surrender to them one Dr. Martin H. Fermi, and I promptly did just that. I was asked to debrief with them in their command trailer. I was seated with a Homeland Security officer in the main cabin. On the screens inside, my chief and a ChemCon representative took up both screens. Behind the two-way mirror, I could see Dr. Fermi being prepped for what I could only imagine what they called enhanced interrogation. I told DHS everything that I knew, everything that Dr. Fermi told me, from his admitted crimes to what he told me about the machine, about Robotex. And I told him that I don't think that Dr. Fermi built his machine with an off switch, and that he was prepared to let his infernal device destroy the company headquarters and destroy whatever threat he was convinced existed within it. I told them that if they wanted to stop it, they would have to bomb it. But the mere suggestion of bombing it was immediately rejected by ChemCon. When they protested, I sarcastically remarked, they should shut it down. It's their technology, after all. The ChemCon rep became more and more resistant to the airstrike option. I started to wonder if the substance that Dr. Fermi described might actually be real. Perhaps they were protecting it, more importantly protecting themselves from further inquiry and possible wrongdoing. It was then that Homeland Security butted in and stated that they would do whatever it takes to protect ChemCon, but that they had reason to believe the vehicle may have a nuclear armament on board, and that the U.S. government would not tolerate the detonation of a nuclear device on American soil, and that whatever relatively small radioactive release would result from the vehicle's destruction was preferable to a mushroom cloud. ChemCon wasn't interested in my speculation or the U.S. government's position, so they dropped out of the call. It didn't matter. As the Homeland Security troops were binding Dr. Fermi to a metal chair and sticking electrodes on his forehead, Dr. Fermi pulled out the winding crown of his expensive watch and jabbed it into his hand. A small pinprick of blood appeared, and Dr. Fermi immediately stopped his resistance. His face seemed to fall into an exhausted state, and then suddenly he looked wide-eyed, wild-eyed even. He scanned the room once and then twice. He betrayed with his eyes and his facial expressions that he wasn't sure where he was anymore. And then he asked, "Who am I?" And he asked it repeatedly. Then he started to struggle against the straps on his legs. And then, just for a moment, he seemed to get it. He looked right at me. Somehow, despite the two-sided mirror, he knew I was there. And then he just opened his mouth, but he couldn't seem to find the right word. I think he tried to pronounce the word "the," but then he just blurted out, "Future is. Future is." And then he broke down crying. He was absolutely sobbing, with messy tears streaming down his face. His voice grew raspier and wilder, and his overall emotional composure was all out, unhindered. I noticed as one of the Homeland Security troops were particularly moistened by Dr. Fermi's meltdown, and that this trooper accidentally touched his face and his eye with his wet hand. As he was attempting to restrain Fermi and wrestle away the watch, he froze. The guard blinked a dozen times in rapid succession and started to scan the room, also seemingly forgetting where he was, just like Dr. Fermi after he poked himself with the needle. At that point, the ChemCon representative reappeared on the monitors and screamed at Boss and the Homeland Security official to kill the broadcast of the interrogation and to turn on the reflector mirror for the interrogation room. He then ordered the trailer evacuated and hazmat teams called in. I was escorted out of the trailer by Homeland Security, and I was ordered back to my home for the rest of the day. I wasn't ordered to secure a location. I wasn't ordered to insist in the evacuation. No, I was simply ordered home, and ordered to not discuss any of the day's events with anyone, under penalty of jeopardizing national security. I protested, but my protests went unheard as Boss stopped taking my calls, and all of the Homeland Security was locked down by a military hazmat team. I was totally cut off and cut out of the situation unfolding in Merriweather. I watched only for a few minutes more the white turtle swim against another row of houses, getting ever closer to its target. I don't give up that easily. So I went to the one place I felt where I could find some answers and stay engaged with the situation. I drove to Dr. Fermi's partially demolished home. Though sealed off with yellow police tape, I still had my badge. That, and the SWAT team and the guard officers had left a long time ago. Likely they left to give chase and take pot shots at the tank. I went into his home, and I discovered the, quote, evidence of religious fanaticism, end quote, that SWAT reported about an hour earlier. The walls were covered in felt marker drawings and scribbles about the biblical flood and Noah's Ark. Though not mentioned by name at the time, I believed that the Great Flood was shorthand for Rebutex, and that he was Noah building his ark, the tank, the device used to survive the Great Flood. There were also multiple references to global climate change and diagrams of the vehicle and what looked like alternative arc plans. One of his alternative plans was labeled as an electromagnetic pulse device. In large letters, he scribbled over his plans, indicating their lack of feasibility. I found myself engrossed by the written rants covering nearly every square inch of wall space. But I was distracted when I felt two sonic booms shake the house. I got up on Dr. Fermi's roof and watched the end of the day's spectacle from there. I watched Predator drones fire missiles, and then finally an F-16 dropped a pair of enormous bombs on it. The bomb's shock, sound, and mushroom cloud could be heard, seen, and felt across the entire town. One way or another, the eggshell turtle-shaped machine was stopped short of the ChemCon building, which, despite suffering visible damage, even from this distance, remained standing on the horizon. The next day was all cleanup and cover-up, and initially the details were vague. According to the media, Dr. Fermi was a mad scientist obsessed with the biblical flood, and he created what was reported as a homemade tank made from a commercial bulldozer that he set loose on the town. The press reported 47 fatalities, including Fermi's wife and daughter, murdered by the doctor days prior. In addition, they reported billions of dollars in property damage from the nearly 15-mile-long swath of destruction. Chief Boss was gone. His absence was unexplained to me at the time, and I was advised to not ask any questions about it. I was formally sworn to secrecy by the feds and given a $10,000 check from ChemCon for my silence on the matter. Dr. Fermi's home was then promptly razed by ChemCon's private security forces. I am a detective, and I was being paid to not do my job. And while as appealing as that might sound on a Friday during a hangover, I was also personally and professionally insulted by this. I felt like I was being bribed and cheated out of the most important thing, the truth. So, against orders, I interviewed some eyewitnesses who had not yet been paid off or scared into silence. They told me that the machine crawled within 300 yards of the HQ building into an open clearing on company property. Drones struck the vehicle several times, slowing it but not shutting it down. Then an F-16 flew in low, banked away, flew in low again, banked away a second time, and then on the third pass it dropped two 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs on the machine. With some more sleuthing, I found out that the order to drop the bombs came from the National Guard, as a clash between ChemCon's corporate paramilitary forces and my police station, backed up with Homeland Security guards, ensued. ChemCon was apparently trying to get the guard to abort the bombing after the drones failed. Another witness told me that the HQ had never been evacuated. And another witness still reported that my boss and the National Guard commander concurred that the loss to property, people, and the possible release of whatever it was from ChemCon in the event that the vehicle breached the building would be too devastating, and that the machine needed to be destroyed in the clearing. Apparently, it was then that ChemCon personnel attempted to protest against the bombing by threatening the lives of the police, my boss included, with their private commandos. Apparently, Chief Boss and a few of my friends, including Officer Redford, did not survive the ensuing battle. But that's all that I found out before I was fired and arrested for breaching my secrecy agreement and for conducting this investigation. I was quickly tried and found guilty under the Patriot Act in a secret trial. I was sentenced to a decade in a federal prison. There I was encased in solitary confinement, not only for the obvious reason of being a former cop, but also a traitor. About 30 months into my sentence, the jail turned off the water, and they started to give us bottled water only. 2 months into that bottled water regime, the power went out, and 3 days after that, the generators gave out, and a prison riot sprung me and virtually everyone else under key. After pushing through the chaos of tear gas and savage prisoners, I emerged from lockdown into a world in flames. People were fighting and dying on the streets for bottled water. All of civilization had broken down, or was on the verge of doing so. People had hung the infected, as they called it, from streetlights, and impaled them on spikes in their front yard. There was no electricity, there was no television. Somewhere there was one news radio station I could pick up on a battery-powered radio. And the last news out of that was that the authorities were shutting down all nuclear power plants, as it was clear that soon there would be no one around to operate them safely. People weren't going to work, they weren't going to school, hospitals were closed. Everyone was just looking for clean water. Information was scarce, but eventually I learned that the Rebudex was, in fact, buried on the company property, under the clearing where the machine was finally stopped. And apparently that was the plan all along. The bunker busters blew the lid off the secret storage facility and cracked the large tanks of Rebudex, which then drained into the bomb-fractured ground underneath. The chemical leaked into the domestic water table and spread into rivers and eventually into the ocean. It spread into the food supply at home. It spread overseas as well, where the effect of the chemical was also ravaging civilization as we knew it. It could spread by fluid contact of the persons tainted by it, but it was mostly in the water and the food supply. And there was no quick way of filtering it out. The potency had already risen to the level that even a few sips of water or bites of a contaminated food meant that you became the rebooted. People feared the rebooted, as they stopped remembering who they were and eventually folded into a hysterical catatonic state for a few hours before becoming primitive. Primitive not in the pejorative sense, I suppose, but in the sense that all they were focused on was short-term, immediate goals of eating, drinking, and reproducing. They forgot how to drive cars, how to speak, how to interact with people and civilization around them. And at first, they were executed on the spot as they turned. Because we were staring ourselves in the face. After subtracting millions and millions of years of evolution, we just couldn't stand what we saw in ourselves. Nor could we do anything to prevent it, as bottled water free of contamination ran low. And through one method of exposure or another, everyone was becoming rebooted. or dead. In the chaos, my mind became clear. That's when I figured it all out. Dr. Fermi was obsessed with global climate change and the possibility of a rapid heating event that would render the planet lifeless. That was the biblical flood for him, not the Reboot X. He was entirely resigned to the notion that our civilization would never change to correct itself in time to make a difference. He viewed the predominant mindset of our civilization as inherently suicidal. So he built the machine, his Ark, to be an unstoppable existential threat, to get as far into that clearing as possible, and then be a sitting duck for bunker buster bombs to breach the underground Reboot X storage. He then relied on our pre-existing sense of denial of threats, and our global food and water distribution networks would do the rest. That morning, Dr. Fermi came to me because he felt I'd be duty-bound to report the incident and handle it the way that I did, with the SWAT team and the bomb squad. It was the head start that permitted the F-16s to eventually be scrambled with the bombs in time and set all of the other events into motion. Reboot X was the savior in a biblical sense. He was even anxiously awaiting pricking himself with the needle in his watch so that he couldn't be tortured into giving up his plan or revealing some weakness in his machine's armor. I have no doubt that he probably did kill his family, most likely out of fear that they would reveal his plan ahead of time. I don't know if he really had a bomb, nuclear or otherwise, on board his tank, but he was smart enough to set the whole thing up. Smart enough to reject other ideas like an EMP is too temporary. I remember one of the objections scrawled on his wall over his EMP plans was that it might keep humanity down for 100 years, but Reboot X would last 1,000 years. I suppose that's about how long it would take plastic to break down in the environment. How ironic. That last revelation came to me about 2 or 3 months ago. I don't remember exactly. Time is an oddly social concept. I mark my days in the clean water and clean booze that I can scrounge up and drink. I'm on my last bottle of clean water. I haven't decided if I'll use the last bullet in my gun on myself so that I can die a human, or if I'll drink the contaminated water and reboot and live out my last days as an ape of sorts. I guess, based on the fact that I haven't met a human in 2 months, that this very well could be one of the last things that humans ever write. For what it's worth, the air is much cleaner. The sunset is oddly pure blue, free of the orange and red colorful pollutants. It's very quiet. The rebooted are very quiet, and they keep to themselves. Some of them have already died off, and I suspect that that's due to their nature. There can only be so many of them supported across a given range, a given ecosystem. They do seem to have some small cognitive abilities, but nothing that I would say is sentience. I've not seen them make fire, but that's the point. The Reboot X is working. Like I said, I don't know if I want to be one, if I'd like to be one. But once I am one, I realize I would not be cognizant of being anything anymore. And I ask myself, is this worse than death? Is this the same thing as death? Well, Dr. Fermi, a toast to you. The future is